Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of Santa Clara City Library's creative writing web series. This week we are going to be continuing with our exploration of evocative imagery. And so let's just go ahead and jump right in here, and we'll start with a quick little recap of what we talked about last week. There will also be a link to last week's video in the description, so if you want to go back and watch that one and do those exercises, it might help this one make a little bit more sense and give you a little bit better handle on what we're working on today. So, what we talked about last week, evocative imagery really is the use of sensory images, or using our senses to create an emotional reaction within the reader or within yourself. So these include obviously seeing, hearing, feeling, that tactile sense of touching, tasting, smelling, so those kinds of senses. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about sensory images. We also use these to create an emotional state. So, if the image creates a sense of happiness, sadness, anger, fear, things like that. And we are going to attach those things to our images, our sensory images, to create sort of that emotional state. So in our exercises from last week, what we did was we created 3 evocative images and we tagged them with those emotional states of being, and then we explored why those images made us feel that way, whether it was some sort of historical memory thing that we have, but basically we want to explore what is it that creates that emotional state for us. So this week, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little exercise I like to call image mining. I'm sure there's probably some official poetry term for this or writing term, but I call it image mining. You can call it whatever you want. You can use this phrase if you like. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose one of the images from last week that we had a particularly strong memory associated with that emotional state. So something that was very vivid for us. And we're going to develop 3 to 5 evocative images related to that memory using different senses from the one that we used last week. So what does that mean? Basically, I'll give you a little example here. Last week I used the leaves of a tree blowing in a breeze. That was my image that I came up with using the sense of sight, or being able to see. I attached the leaves, I attached the emotional state of happiness or joy to those leaves. And when I explored, kind of dug a little bit deeper, I remembered summer vacations as a kid when I could lay out on the lawn with no responsibilities and stare off into the sky. So that was the image that I chose. That was the emotional state it triggered. And that was the memory, the sense memory that triggered when I thought about that image. So I decided to kind of stick with that whole thing of like summer vacations and being a kid and having that kind of a memory for this week's exercise, and coming up with more sensory images. So one of the images I came up with, using my sense of hearing, the chimes of the ice cream van in the distance. That reminds me of being a young kid hanging out during summer. I used the sense of feeling or touch, the summer sun beating down on my shoulders, so the feeling of that sun, the heat. And then the sense of smell, I used fresh cut grass, because that, for whatever reason, always makes me think of summertime. I don't know why. Obviously, people probably cut their grass at any time of the year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 4 images, the leaves, the ice cream van, the summer sun, and the fresh cut grass. I'm going to try and craft some kind of a poem, some sort of a sensory poem. So I came up with an example here, and let's go ahead and just walk through it. The young buds of the oleander tree softly swayed in the breeze, while the tinny chimes of ice cream vans sang promises of cool relief. The sun beat down upon my shoulders as the scent of freshly chopped lawns lingered on my street. Okay, so that's my sensory image poem. So now what we're going to do, once you've come up with your poem, let's dive a little bit deeper, and we're going to analyze it. So number 1, do each of those images that you chose trigger the same emotional state as the original one? So do all of those things for me trigger happiness and joy, or not? And if not, do they trigger different emotional states? Why do you suppose that is? And this is really important, because this is going to start to give us some control over our poem and over our images. When you rearrange the images on the page, how does that create some kind of emotional movement? How does the tone shift? Does it create a happier ending? Is it ominous? Does it leave a sense of foreboding? So basically what we're getting at here is when we understand the emotional state that each of those images trigger, we can create a kind of emotional movement in our poem. We can start happy and sort of make it a little bit darker and more ominous at the end, or vice versa. We can start with something that maybe feels a little ominous and we can brighten it up by the end. So that's how we're going to create that kind of emotional movement. So I just noted mine on here, the young buds of the oleander tree softly swaying in the breeze. That creates a sense of happiness, maybe slowness, sort of really kind of evoking that spirit of summer and laziness for me. And of course, these are just the things, the emotional states that these trigger for you in particular. While the tinny chime of the ice cream vans, while the tinny chimes of the ice cream vans saying promises of cool relief. So that creates that sense of joy, that relief. I use the actual word relief in there. But while the tinny chimes of the ice cream van saying promises of cool relief. So that kind of creates that sense of joy or happiness there. The sun beat down upon my shoulders. Now this one, I think, creates kind of a different feeling. It feels harsh. Maybe it feels a little bit painful. So we can see we start with something happy and slow, and then it gets a little bit more painful. And then we end with, as the scent of fresh chopped lawns lingered on my street. That feels a little ambiguous to me. Seems like it could go both ways. I feel like the word chopped in lawns feels a little harsh. That feels a little rough maybe. But the idea of lingering on my street maybe evokes that positive sense of memory, or trying to recapture that youth. So basically what we're doing is we're just breaking this down and seeing what sort of emotional states do these things trigger, and how can we use that in order to create some sort of movement in our work. For example, this sun beat down on upon my shoulders. We could spice that up a little bit and maybe say something like, the sun beat down while the skin on my shoulders peeled. Right? That's a much more harsh, much more painful image. So you can adjust once you get something down on paper. Okay? So that's going to be your exercise for this week. Here's the quick wrap up. Try this image mining on some of your work. Try and use it on some of the things you came up with last week or the week before, or just explore. See what you can come up with. Your next challenge for the week is pick something that happened in the past week that you want to remember forever. Or maybe you just don't want to forget. Forever's a long time. Using your 5 senses, come up with images that make you remember that thing. So sight, smell, hearing, tasting, yada, yada, yada. Jot them down in your writer's notebook. And as always, if you've got questions, comments, suggestions, feel free to email me, librarians@santaclaraca.gov. Put creative writing in the subject line, make sure it gets to me, and have a good time. And we will see you next week.